Hello, my name is Patrick Takinen, and my topic for my research proposal is using technology to develop language acquisition in the secondary level social science classroom. Chapter 1 of my research proposal includes the introduction, the background to the study, the purpose of the study, significance of the paper, the research questions that I'll explore, as well as the assumptions, limitations, delimitations, and a conclusion. In the nature to my study or the background to my study, I was largely interested in how technology could assist with this English language learner growth that we're seeing in the United States. We're also seeing a technology growth again in the United States, and particularly in the field of education, as schools are adopting things like the use of mobile devices in the classroom, or even some schools going as far as providing students with Chromebooks or similar laptops to access the internet. This leads into the purpose of my study. In my study, I wanted to examine the implementation of technology and its relation specifically to language acquisition and vocabulary development in the social science classroom. As I noted in the research paper, there are several factors that play into what language acquisition means and what vocabulary needs to be developed. And this is all compounded by research and works from different time periods and potential biases that can arise in historical texts. Which then leads into the significance of the paper, which is to really explore and examine the benefits and limitations that technology has in providing language acquisition and vocabulary development skills and tools for both English language learners and non-English language learners in the classroom. There are two main research questions that I used when exploring this topic. The first one is, what effects does technology have on language acquisition in secondary level social science classrooms? And then the second question examines, what are the limitations and benefits of technology in terms of vocabulary development? So I focused on the social science classroom specifically because it's my field of study. And then I also provided a rather broad research question in the limitations and benefits in terms of vocabulary development, which can really be expanded upon as we get towards chapter 4 when we get into the what's next, what other steps can be taken in research. Chapter 2 is the literature review, which is where I conducted all of the research and really focused down my research questions to establish what the goal of my research was. I began this by looking at the role that technology is starting to play in the classroom, and also by looking at how can teachers assist English language learners in language acquisition and vocabulary development, while at the same time still teaching curriculum and content that's needed to pass the class. After looking at my initial research questions and what I really wanted to focus on in the research study, I began to compile all of the resources that I would be using. To do this, I used National University's library as well as Cal State Fullerton University Library, which I have access to because I was a student there. So they gave us access to it for 5 years after we graduate. I also utilized Google Scholar to find two resources that were specific to American public schools. One of them was also specific to social science in American public schools. So having the variety of resource engines available significantly helped with my research study. For the purpose of this presentation, I narrowed down the important sources or significant research to two people or two studies. The first one is Akbar and Chen, and the second one is Jarvis and Krashen. Both of the studies explored the ways in which technology is being utilized in the classroom and the various approaches that can be taken to ensure that both language acquisition and development of vocabulary through technology is being implemented. Jarvis and Krashen specifically explored what they called the CALL protocol, which is the computer assisted language learning. It was developed in the 1960s. They've then gone on and further explored it and basically modified the approach. They now call it the mobile assisted language use protocol. And basically what they did is they took any classrooms that were using technology and explored how they were using the technology, what advancements teachers had made in using the technology, and they brought up a bunch of interesting ideas and developments in how technology is now being utilized in the classroom. Um, Going into detail with things such as the smartphone, cheap and accessible Chromebooks or laptops, and the use of the internet to convey ideas and further develop academic learning. Chapter 3 of the research project is the methodology section, and this is where data collection and data analysis are highlighted. For data collection, the purpose was to collect qualitative data, and the main way to do this is through three methods. The first method is through pre-assessment, which is going to gauge the students where they're at on language acquisition and vocabulary development. The second is measurable from programs that were utilized by all three teachers in the study, and that would be through um, computer programs such as Kahoot, Google Classroom, and GoGuardian, which gives me screen time and time on correct screens and various other ways in which the teachers are implementing technology in the classroom. And the final qualitative data collection is through interviews. That includes both student interviews and teacher interviews. In the teacher interviews, I'm measuring how they're feeling about using technology in the classroom, what specific methods they use to utilize technology in the classroom, and then with the students, I want to interview both non-English language learners and English language learners to get similar opinions on how they feel that technology is either assisting them or is providing limitations into their language acquisition and their development of academic vocabulary. For the methodology section, to get into it specifically would take probably about a half hour to 45 minutes of explanation, so I'm going to try and keep it brief. The first thing that would be needed would be approvals, and that would be through first the school site administrator, and then I would need approvals from the teachers to conduct research in their classrooms. Following that, I would need approvals from students. They're under the age of 18, so they definitely need parent permission as well. Upon gaining those permissions, I should be able to conduct research across this 14-week timeline that I've laid out. The timeline is 14 weeks, but it's actually broken down into 3 4-week periods, with a week at the beginning of the timeline and a week at the end of the timeline to brief teachers, brief administrators, brief students, and then go ahead at the end and debrief teachers, debrief students, and debrief administrators. So over these 4 3-week periods, basically the meat of the timeline is where I will be conducting teacher interviews, student interviews, classroom observations, as well as giving the teachers and students a pre-assessment and a post-assessment. In the final week of the timeline, so week 14 of the timeline, I will also be collecting any classroom materials that I'm allowed to collect and use as research, and this would be anything from informal assessments or formal assessments used in the classroom, and also the technological assessments that I can acquire, such as like the GoGuardian materials and materials from quizzes that were given through technology like Kahoot or Google Classroom. Chapter 4 is the reflection on the process that we've gone through so far on this action research project. And so I'm going to give some of a summary of what I've written for the Chapter 4 reflection. I've actually really enjoyed this project. It's always better to have something that you're interested in and that you kind of get to shape and develop where you want to go with the project. So I've learned extensively about the use of technology in terms of language acquisition and vocabulary development in both English language learners and non-English language learners. And I feel like I've really expanded professionally in terms of what it means to develop not only an action research study, but any educational study into my field of knowledge, which would be social science. In this study, I feel that I've really addressed how the use of technology could demonstrate a potential for assisting in language acquisition or vocabulary development for any student in the secondary level social science classroom. But not only that, I feel like that this study could be implemented rather easily across any academic field, such as math or English or even physical education. Which leads into my final slide of the night, which is the next steps. In terms of this research study, I feel like there's several different ways that somebody could go were they to try to recreate this research proposal, um, which would be to either take it and implement it into another setting, such as English or math or physical education. Not only that, but they could also try a different grade level. I focused on secondary level education. This could easily be implemented into an elementary school, any K-12 environment, and see what the results say. Another potential research study that could stem from this would be to conduct the research and then conduct the research again in a different field and compare the data from the two studies. If I were to go back to the first course and have a better understanding of the goals and research study ahead of time, I probably would have done this. I probably would have said, hey, I'm going to do this in social science and I'm going to do this in English, and I'm going to compare the results of how technology can be utilized differently across the two fields, but still promote language acquisition and vocabulary development. Thank you for watching.